Welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast. This is the podcast where four therapists, three of us Canadian, one of us American, serve you cutting edge mental health knowledge. My name is Ryan Howes. I'm a psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I'm Brooke Lewis, a registered clinical counselor from the Vancouver, Canada area.
I'm Chris Boyd.
Oh,
sir. Oh, go ahead.
Great, bud. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Bob. I'm Chris Boyd, psychotherapist from Coquitlam outside Vancouver.
I'm Denis Boyd, and I'm in Coquitlam too. I'm also a psychologist.
Yes.
Are you guys related somehow?
No.
Coincidence, last name?
That's it.
Oh, very good.
I'm filling in for Joanna Boyd, who's off on a little weekend retreat. So I'm happy to be here.
Always a pleasure to have you here, Denis.
Indeed. You really bring it up a notch.
Yeah, really does. And I'm so excited because you're actually going to be the ambusher today. You're dropping the topic, so I can't wait for that. Not yet, but coming pretty soon.
All right.
It's great.
Yeah.
So what were we going to say, Chris?
Well, speaking of ambushes, I was reflecting on the one last week, and we did such an amazing job talking about books that we didn't actually talk about the movies or documentaries or other resources.
You're right.
Yeah.
The question was a broad topic about what we might recommend to clients, book recommendations we might make, as well as other resources, including movies, or podcasts, TED Talks, or maybe even programs, or I don't know, something like the online mental health boot camp might be an interesting resource to advise people. Since we're such self-promoters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was a bit of it's an interesting topic, right? Because it once you start thinking about it, then more and more resources come to mind and kind of takes off on its own. But I didn't want it to leave us limited in case somebody had a really great TED Talk or something.
Sure. So did you have something in mind, Chris?
No, I was just kind of reflecting. We got so carried away with books, but there's definitely some good TED Talks out there, though. I don't know if we want to jump into those now or leave it for another time, but great topic though, Brooke. And Ryan, must have taken a little while to upload all those titles. Did you just finish up before?
I just finished up now. Yeah, it took me all week long. No, it took me a while, but we had like 40, 45 titles that we shared with people, and I just linked to their Amazon page so people could find those books if they were interested. So let's run through 40 or 50 TED Talks or something, Chris, and then keep me going until next week. What do you say? No, I do actually. One that I like to recommend sometimes to people is Kelly McGonigal's The Upside of Stress. One of my favorites there. She talks about how, interestingly, stress can be bad for you, stress can be good for you, or stress can be kind of neutral, but a lot of it depends on how you feel about stress. If you feel like stress is bad for you, it will be, actually, which is a really interesting viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
If you view something as like a horrific challenge or horrific obstacle and that sort of thing, that's going to be a negative. But if you feel like it's a good challenge, and man, you like challenges and you like to step up to the plate and face a challenge, that can actually be really invigorating for you. So that's the McGonigal one.
Yeah, and also, of course, Brene's gigantic TED Talk. They could put her on the map there. That's probably worth mentioning.
Brene Brown's vulnerability talk.
Vulnerability, yeah. But people loved her authenticity and her delivery, and I think that really resonated with a lot of people.
Yes.
Another one pops in my mind is Dan Gilbert's The Surprising Science of Happiness. That was pretty good.
Seems like you've really been thinking about this one, Chris. Have you been just thinking about it all week?
I have. Just waiting for my opportunity to share them,
Mm.
Yeah. On another note, 39 years ago, something major happened. The old man there, Dennis, started his counseling practice.
Yeah.
Denis Boyd and Associates. So today, 39 years later, we have 24 therapists in Coquitlam, so just outside Vancouver.
Right.
I think for a good portion of that 39 years, it was the biggest private practice in BC. Amazing reputation.
Mhm.
So it's kind of neat. I was actually born 39 years ago as well. So I got to grow up around a great team of psychologists and counselors. And myself, as well as Brooke, got to be evening receptionists at that practice as well. So great opportunities for mentorship, and
Yeah.
we all work there, as well as Joanna too. So
Yeah.
big day.
Yeah, it was the year we started that. Your mom and I were just talking about it. She was carrying you. You were born a little while after, a month or so after we started. It was a little bit of a stressful time, a bit of uncertainty, but here we are. Worked out well.
Mhm.
Wow.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Giving birth to a practice and a bouncing baby boy, huh?
Yeah.
Same time.
And they're together now, so we can't beat that combination. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
That's-
been great. It goes too quickly though. When they say seize the moment, the old guys around say live the moment well. They mean it because they go quickly.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's been good.
Dennis, what's been, if there's been one key to keeping a practice alive and thriving for 39 years, what would you say that is?
Gosh, I think trying to make the practice like family, treating people in the practice as if they're family, and supporting them where we can and being supported by them,
Mhm.
I think that's been a big part of it. We've tried to do that in small ways. In other ways, Maureen, Chris's mom, is our managing partner, and she's really the heart of the practice. And she not only is a good administrator, but she takes care of making sure people's birthdays are acknowledged and special occasions. And so it's been a big boost for us. So I think the family environment we have there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. It's all relationships, isn't it?
It's all about relationship. Yeah, you got it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Congratulations. That is quite an accomplishment. And wow, I was just thinking about, with 39 years and 20 some therapists working there all year round, how many individual sessions of psychotherapy have taken place in that spot?
Oh,
Yeah. Good point.
And not only that, but how many insights were arrived at, or tears shed, healing tears shed, just aha moments that have taken place there. That's got to be staggering.
mhm.
I was really glad when Costco opened so we could go buy our tissue in bulk, because we were going through a lot of, as we do in these practices. So it's good to be able to get it in bulk. Take care of the sensitive stuff.
That's it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Well, that's awesome. Here's to 39 more years.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Right on.
There you are, Chris.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, look, we might as well just dive in, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm really excited that Dennis will be ambushing the three of us. He knows the topic, the rest of us don't, and it'll be ready to dive in. And it looks like the question has just passed through customs, down across the border, and it's arrived here in California. Here we go. Grief Revisited, or Grief Part 2. Stages versus reactions. Okay. What does core grief look like? What is unhealthy grief? And what are some good coping strategies? Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. But
I should have known, Dennis. I should have known. This is one area. So Dennis really works a lot with grief and in couples and marriage counseling. I don't know if they go together or not. Maybe
They
you
do
could comment on
sometimes,
that. But
unfortunately.
yeah,
Sometimes they do. Yeah.
yeah. So he's
Wow.
the expert in our office for this. So good one. Awesome.
There you are.
I'm excited to hear more about grief. I've certainly encountered grief on various levels on a regular basis in practice, and love thinking about it and trying to help people work through it. I usually tell people, you tell me if I'm wrong on this one, Dennis, or if you conceptualize it differently, but I like to tell people that grief is it's a very natural process, and it's usually not about trying to push someone into grief as much as it is allowing it to take place without obstruction and without it kind of getting in the way of it, right?
Right. Yeah, I think part of the problem with grief is people don't realize what it is. It feels kind of crazy sometimes, and I think that makes people really uncomfortable. So one of the challenges maybe is to normalize what the grief experience can be like, to understand the core, but that helps people a lot, because I don't think we need grief therapists so much as educators who give them a few tips on what to expect and then what to do with it. Because people can usually work their way through it quite well. There are exceptions, but encouraging them to be with it.
Well, I know we touched on this before, but we might as well do what we usually do and just sort of start by defining the terms here. When we're talking about grief, some people have different conceptions of grief. They feel like grief is only about losing a loved one. So a loved one dies and then you grieve it.
Right.
But we therapists usually have a broader understanding of it, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah. It's more of the general sense of loss. So it could be, of course, an individual, but it could also be a job. It could be health. It could be a number of different things.
When you think of grief, what emotions come to mind? Because people use the term grief as if it's an experience unto itself, but it's really like a mosaic. It's a collection of a lot of different feelings. It's not just one. And sadness, of course, is there. But what other feelings come to mind when you think of grief? If it's a mosaic, what are they? There's some that are just classic. You can almost see them every time somebody's had a loss, if they're in pain.
Yeah.
What's your observations been?
I think anger sometimes pops up.
And hurt. But also for me, I always like to see the love. I think love belongs in that mosaic, especially when talking of a person that's passed away, that's been close.
Right.
I don't think the grief would be that strong if there wasn't a lot of love behind it.
Well, it's an interesting point you make, because Earl Grolman, who's I'm not sure he's even still with us, he's a rabbi from Boston. He said that grief is an expression of love.
Mm-hmm.
That the grief experience, the more we love somebody, the bigger the grief will be. But to think of grief as a collection of probably every feeling helps me a lot. Anger is certainly there, but sadness, yearning for the person, confusion, you name it, they're all there. So
yeah, anxiety as well. It may alter the course of your life and create some uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's some anxiety in there.
Now with COVID, we're all living some anxiety anyway. So if people are grieving now, I've met a few that have lost spouses or whatnot. Their grief seems to be up a level or two, because there's already a lot of general anxiety related to living this pandemic experience. So it all kind of blends together, it seems.
For sure. Yeah.
I would also say that something that I often see along with grief is this sort of confused kind of bewilderment, like as people are adjusting to this, especially in the earliest part, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine my world this way now. And that could be, it's not just about losing a loved one. It could be losing something in your future, or losing some part of your history, or losing your idea of who someone was, and then finding out who they really are. There's all sorts of different manifestations of this, but there is this sort of, wow, how am I going to live in this world?
Yeah. One of the reasons the stage theory it fell out of popularity quite soon after Kubler-Ross brought it out. And Chris, you mentioned in the first edition of Grief program 4 you guys did, that it was very, very popular for a number of years. Is very true. But one researcher from England said, what we have to teach people is there are 305 stages or whatever of grief, not just 5. And so Kessler, though, is in his book, you mentioned you'd interviewed him, Ryan. He's added that meaning piece, which I think is really cool, but it's brought the stages back up again. I like to look at it as reactions and break them into physical. There's physical reactions, there's psychological, mental, social reactions. And you're talking about confusion and lack of concentration. Those are very normal grief reactions, and they scare people. But lots of emotion too, lots of physical pain. There's lots of various things that happen there. So just to broaden that spectrum a bit from the stage theory to reactions gives us a little more room to move.
I like that, Dennis, because I think people do get really scared if their body is taking over,
Yeah.
So if you're having these visceral physical responses or like cognitive confusion or concentration,
Right.
really spooks people, right?
Yeah.
They think something's very medically wrong with them.
Especially older people, the dementia is never far away as a fear. And so when they have these normal grief reactions that are typical of somebody who's hurting, young person, old person, it's nice to reassure them that they're probably okay.
And that's something to keep in mind, especially I guess as people age, you might have to go through more grief, right?
There's lots of, it's never far away as you get a little bit older.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure.
One of the things I thought I'd ask you guys about is what you think, what are the factors that influence grief? I mean, it'd be interesting to talk about unhealthy grief as well, but what do you think the factors are? Because you were talking a touch about that in your first show. I thought we could expand on that a bit. What are some factors you think that make a difference for each person that we see? There's various things that influence their grief. What do you think, not putting you on the spot, I have a couple in mind, but what do you think some of the factors might be?
No, this is great. This is a true ambush here.
Yeah,
Question after question.
What you guys earn your
Yeah, at least we know you're the cleanup crew. So if we miss something, then you're gonna get it.
Just turn it back and ask Dennis what he thinks. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. I think there's a cultural component.
Yeah.
I think that you see that sometimes, not overtly showing emotion or trying to suppress that or trying to act tough.
Yeah.
So kind of suck it up and get over it. So that's one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Previous grief experiences, right? History of grief and how has that been dealt with before? I don't know if these are what you're looking for, but I think it was you, Dennis, we're in a case consult and talking about the age of the person, how close they were to you, and how sudden the death was. And that would impact the grief response. So if the strongest grief being a young child who passed away unexpectedly. I don't know if that is what I recall correctly, but I think it was in a case consult that came up.
It's not bad. That's pretty good.
Is that right? Does that sound appropriate?
Yeah, those are where it gets a little tricky is when you guys were meeting before, you talked about there may be times where there may not be any grief because Ryan, I remember you saying that the loss could be expected or you're actually looking forward to the loss. There's relief, and that certainly can be true. But then I saw this interesting thing happen with my mom. Her dad, her stepfather and herself were not very close. And when he died, I was with her at the funeral and we were at the cemetery, and there were a group of old Danes there, and they would stand around the coffin and sing this song in Danish to the tune of Silent Night, which kind of wasted me. But they were all wandering off, and my mom stayed back and went up and touched my grandfather's coffin and started to cry. And in that moment, she was grieving for the relationship she never had with her grandfather, with her father. And so it flips on us. You think you're not going to have, but then there's that potential for something better that gets lost too. And so it gets kind of confusing sometimes, but also quite normal, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think a complicating factor can also be trauma. We talk a lot about trauma in this podcast. I have a client right now who is grieving the loss of a relationship, but the magnitude of this of the grief reaction is quite high. The sadness and the anger and the frustration and through our therapeutic work, it seems like there was some significant trauma that happened, and that was the first time she actually felt safe and secure within that relationship. It was far from perfect, but So for it to end so abruptly really rattled her to her core, right? So in terms of our grief work, in regard to that relationship, we had to kind of go back a bit and address that trauma that happened when she was a child.
So in that regard, do you think that attachment is one of these factors? Like, do attachment styles impact grief or the level or expression or reaction of grief?
Wouldn't be
Sure would.
surprised. Yeah, wouldn't be surprised. I think you mentioned a minute ago, Brooke, that old losses impact how we grieve now. And it's like a window opens, and old losses that we never quite finished with all show up when we're grieving in the present moment, and we have a chance to go back and finish those losses. So whether it's trauma or something else, it's a chance to, and some people get disconcerted because they think, I've been thinking about my grandmother who died 5 years ago, and really there never was a chance to grieve her properly. And so now's the chance to catch up. So that can factor in as well, I think.
I will toss out there also something that we've probably all seen at one time or another, and that is the my last interaction with scenario, right? Which is, someone who has a hard time grieving the loss of the person because they're stuck beating themselves up because the last time they saw mom or grandpa, whatever, the last time they saw them, they had an argument, or gosh, I wish I would have, there's guilt that comes up. I wish I would have told him to remember to take his pill, or, whatever that might be. And people can really get stuck in those areas of beating themselves up and just, instead of focusing on the years and years of a nice relationship maybe they had with them, or just a healthy human relationship with its ups and downs, they get so focused on that last interaction that it kind of spoils it for them,
So if we look at unhealthy grief, there's 4 that come to mind. One is absence of grief, which could mean there wasn't much to grieve about, but even if there wasn't, there still is the loss of what we could have had. And that usually leads to some sort of psychological collapse or ulcer or whatever, physical illness. But the others, I think you're talking about, it could be a stuck reaction where there was unfinished business with a person. Yep. And their grief gets stuck and they can't kind of move through it because they never did say sorry for not having them take the pill or whatever. And so they got to work that through for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great distinctions here. So the absence of grief, some sort of a stuckness, something that what we might call, or what I think the DSM calls complicated bereavement, right? Where there's this mixture of feelings that makes it hard to just let things go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that DSM point about complicated, I've smiled to myself about that. It seems like a contradiction to me. Normal grief is very complicated. It's chaotic. It's a roller coaster ride. It's up and down. Unhealthy grief isn't very complicated at all. It looks like you're fine. You're a time bomb, mind you, but I know what they're referring to there. It is a roller coaster ride. The healthy grief, up and down all over the place. So reassuring people they're okay is they'll come in and say, I'm riding a roller coaster. Yeah, well, good, because that's what you're supposed to be doing. So reassurance.
So how long should that roller coaster ride last for? I know it's different for everybody, and it's tough to attach a time limit to that. But when would you determine if it's maybe crossing to that realm of a complicated grief situation?
Usually give it a year. It's hard to tell anything without getting that first year under your belt because of all the firsts, all the anniversaries that go by without the person that stimulate the grief. It's called anniversary grief. What time of the year is the most noticeable anniversary grief? Christmas. One woman, it was Valentine's Day. It varies. So we get through that first year. The other thing for me is if the grief is getting worse over that year, that usually means there's probably something going on. If it starts to get better and better, that's a pretty good sign. But it varies. I mean, one of the factors that influences, if a child dies, it's a 5-year grief experience, up and down roller coaster riding, getting better and better. It's not going to happen quickly. If that child was murdered, it's off the charts. Or if there was a suicide, it's going to be, again, very big grief that's going to go on longer than others. So it varies on how it happened.
Hmm.
So just to put that in some kind of context, because otherwise people worry about whether they're okay or not okay. The other thing is if somebody's with cancer and they die after many months of being ill, there was a lot of anticipatory grief that happened while they were ill. And so that probably will make the post-death grief somewhat less intense in some way, not right away, but later on less intense. So
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Dennis. I've worked with a lot of folks on that very topic, kind of what we call pre-grieving, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna pre-grieve and some people who I believe that they have in their head that if the more that I can kind of grieve it now, kind of get it out of the way now, then maybe it won't hurt so bad when the person dies or leaves, and then I can avoid some of that deeper pain.
Mhm.
But in my experience, they still feel the pain. If grandma's got 6 months to live and you try to pre-grieve as much as you can before that, it's still going to hurt when she's gone. I mean, you're facing some realities maybe more than other people would, but it's not. It doesn't really take away the depth of the pain.
Yeah, I think you're right there, especially at the time of the loss. It's such a upsetting experience, even if you're anticipating it. But 6 or 8 months later, you may find the intensity is lessening a little more than it would if she died very suddenly. You'll get a bit of variation there, but yeah, it's going to be there. Can't get it out of the way.
Can't sidestep it. Right.
Dennis, in just with this past year with COVID, I'm sure you've had some clients come in where they've lost family members. I know I
Right.
have. And I'm wondering, are you noticing, is it just a similar pattern than usual? Because if it's someone in ill health who gets COVID, the likelihood of them passing is higher. So I don't and it's so sudden, like you're aware it's going to happen, but it happens so quickly. And I'm just curious, have you noticed anything slightly different with that, or is it pretty much the same?
Now, you've seen a bit of that too. What do you think? What's your take on it? Let me flip it on you.
Yeah, so that's fine. That's okay. So for me, the persons that have lost loved ones, it did happen quickly, but the persons that passed away were grandparents who, yeah, they kind of, the grandchildren were who I was seeing, and they were aware that, okay, this is likely going to happen and that's okay. But the view for them, the view of the afterlife was very comforting. And my client in particular was the chosen person to be the visitor in the hospital.
Mhm.
So she was able to go see the grandparent and see them struggling and wish them well and gave a blessing to pass to the other side, and that knowing that he was going to be so much healthier, like feel better and happier and not suffering any longer. And shortly after that, the grandmother, so the partner, passed away as well, and just knowing they were going to be together. So
Mm.
for her, it was a very pleasant one. I'm not sure if that's what you've noticed too, or.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed related to that is there was a situation where a family member was ill and anticipated death, they call it, expected death. But they didn't think it would happen for a few months, and COVID came along and they were gone very quickly. So you have the shock of the sudden death in the experience of an anticipated. So it gets confusing again. So it can happen where everybody thinks they're prepared, and then it happens sooner than they thought. And the grief is what Ryan mentioned. It's very painful, and they're dealing with it as best they can.
Mhm.
But I'm curious about what you guys have been telling your clients to help them cope with grief. I think I'm suggesting that we normalize it for them. Like, I've had more grieving clients leave my session saying, "You mean I'm not crazy?" I said, well, if you were crazy, you wouldn't be asking the question, because most of the people I have met who are perhaps crazy think they're fine. They think everybody else is nuts. And yet you're worrying about, it feels crazy to be grieving healthily, but what have you guys found that helps? Because there's certain things that seem to work better than others.
I go back to kind of that bit of education from the beginning of the the question here today, which is just that it's a natural process that we really only muck up if we try to stop it or, sidestep it or get out of its way. We got to face it and feel it. Ride that roller coaster. If you need to cry, cry. If you want to yell, yell. Give yourself space to feel and to hurt and to reach out for help and, kind of lose it for a while. And it's an odd thing, but it's the way that the body kind of processes this loss.
My generation was brought up to put the feelings away and pretend you don't have any. And that's very cultural as well. And there are kids your age who were brought up with parents who believe that. And so I think what you're saying is right on, but we have to convince people that what they learned when they were younger isn't probably working anymore. Let's experiment with being real about what we feel.
Yeah. I think great point so far. And the catharsis idea, just talking about it, sharing the stories, bringing pictures to the sessions, right? Hopefully there's a family member or friend that they can open up to as well. It's the most intriguing thing. Like when you start to share those stories, you feel a little lighter as time goes on. So I've experienced that myself. Writing as well. If you don't have someone to talk to, then in just 20 minutes and start off with whatever's bothering the most in that moment and kind of let it flow. So you do that, 4 days in a row. Jamie Baker is researching that for a number of years. I know you suggest that a lot too, Dad. I know it's one of your go-to techniques, right?
The writing,
yeah.
Yeah, especially letters. If there's unfinished business that Ryan was referring to earlier, the letters work very well. And they do something symbolic with the letter, burn it or do whatever. But it's not easy to write those letters. It sometimes takes a bit of coaxing. But boy, the payoff is really worth it if they can. And it's very private. I was thinking of C.S. Lewis when his wife died. He never talked to anybody. He just wrote it all down and created this book called A Grief Observed, which is a beautiful book about what he lived when his wife died. So you can write it out, you can talk it out, but it's sure nice to have some hugs. And if you want hugs, I think we should check with people who are grieving if they want hugs. Some don't, so we give them space.
Or if they're Brooke.
Well, Brooke, I think in a pinch might take a hug, but Chris is the big hugger, I
think. The takeaway from Kessler's latest work there is about the 6 stage of grief being meaning, and the whole process there is just kind of thinking about that person's life, what sort of lessons that they embodied or some things that they lived, and seeing if you can incorporate that into your own life. So the idea of we were talking because we were talking about this editor of mine from the Psychotherapy Networker who had died, and we were talking specifically about him and kind of what meaning that David was going to take from that. And he's like, well, Rich Simon made me edit and re-edit my work to become the best writer I could possibly be. And that kind of work ethic and focus attention on detail just to really get the point across clearly is something he'll always take with him. So I like that idea too. What is it that what will live on through me from this person?
Yeah. That's so powerful, isn't it? Yeah, to embody that. If you choose to shift your behavior because of that individual, what an amazing way to honor that person. It also helps you kind of delve into it and really try to capture the essence of that individual too, which I think is a very powerful process. Also, like just allowing people to take a day. Like if it may seem like things are getting a little lighter and better, but it may hit you one day and you just feel kind of off, and maybe you stay in your pajamas, maybe look at old photos or and I think it's cry. It's make you feel a little better, and I'm sure the next day you'll be back on track, right? That whole idea of balance, like just trying to keep that routine, even the basics. Sleep might be difficult, but just the getting out for walks and eating and you probably want to you could take some days for bereavement, but getting back to work might not be such a bad idea.
Yeah, I tend to like to get people back to work fairly soon after a lot, not right away, but take whatever time they think they need, but a month or so, whatever, maybe a couple of months. because it gives them a break from the grief. The routine of everyday life gets them a root, you just can't deal with it all the time, right? You have to have some breaks. So when I think of reactions, there's physical, psychological, spiritual as well. And the meaning part that Kessler talks about is the spiritual. And I think it comes later in the journey after a lot of the emotional turbulence has settled down. It's a really strong concept he's presented there. It's super, and he went through it. I mean, I think he lost his boy, eh?
He lost his son, yeah.
He really knows what he's talking about there. So, yeah.
You mentioned the spirituality, and for a lot of people, they may have a faith that is important to them, and that connection lives on in so many different ways. So trying to understand what someone's belief system kind of looks like in regard to their spirituality, and because my goodness, what a powerful tool that could be as well.
And this could be, organized or non-organized spirituality, people who have a particular doctrine that they follow, or some folks who feel like, we're all just stardust, we're energy in the universe, we ashes to ashes, dust to dust, go back to the earth and reuse our nutrients for the world. Whatever it might be, that sort of circle of life sort of idea, how do we fit in, and how do our lives fit in, can be very comforting and give perspective to people.
God gets into trouble for some religious people when a child dies. They are scandalized and they'll get really mad at God. I think a lot of religious traditions don't take enough time to talk about where the suffering experience of life fits into the spiritual journey, that one can actually get closer to God through the suffering. But when a child's, they're going through that turmoil, it's really hard to go. So some people lose their faith for a while when they're grieving, and others find it. It's very interesting how it works. But most of us, I think you're right, are going to be touched in some way.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Brooke about pets. Pets are part of a family. You've got two special people, little guys there. What about clients who've lost pets and they grieve like they're my family members, right?
Oh, man.
Absolutely.
I do not even like to think about that day. My goodness. It would whew. Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
That grief is so deep for people. Just pets being unconditional love and acceptance, right? There's and Ryan too. Ryan has a dog now named Lexi. I don't know how strong your attachment is quite yet. I'm sure it's strong, but
very strong.
It continues on, right? And so some of the people, I have had clients in the past where they've lost pets, and it has rocked them for a little while there. And then some people get a new pet right away, and other people just want to hold off for a very long time. And I think it's a very deep and real grief when that happens. I know your family's lost a few too, right?
It's so interesting, isn't it, when someone loses a pet and they come into counseling, and one of the first things they say is, I know it's just a dog, but and right away trying to normalize that experience and say, no, of course it's the connection, that attachment you have with the dog. And as Brooke mentioned, it's a very strong one, right? The unconditional aspect of it. Dogs are the best listeners. The companionship.
Doing these virtual sessions, and invariably most of the clients have a dog. Some have cats, but the dogs are always nearby, and they're trying to get in on the action because they don't like sharing their mom and dad with me. But one guy got upset. We were talking about his grandmother who died 10 years ago, and he left Europe and came here, and I had a hunch he hadn't really dealt with it. I just asked him a few questions, and he started to tear up, and his little dog got up on his lap and got up and licked his cheek, was giving him a bit of love there. It was totally connected to him. It was very cool.
Wow.
Cats, on the other hand, when cats are there, what the cats do is they walk across the screen back and forth as if they own the place there. I'm not sure how loving they're loving too, but anyway, I digress.
Yeah. But also on the note of pets, instead of the grief of the pet, using a pet as a coping post-grief has been amazing for so many of my clients, because it forces them, like the dogs and cats need to eat. If it's a dog, they need to go out and they need to be walked, and just having something else that needs their care and attention and isn't going to give up on that, right? Like they're not going to go away. And that's really helped them move through.
Good point.
That is. That is. Yes. Well, let's see. Any other sort of tips for people, coping mechanisms to help people move through? We've talked about writing. We've talked about sharing with others. How about like grief support groups and these sorts of things? Has anyone been a part of kind of sharing grief with other grievers, that sort of thing?
That works beautifully because the people who are grieving find the experience so authentic because they're with other people who've gone through something similar. And so getting a bunch of grieving people together as a professional is really an effective way to get them to work through and not try and get in the way of that, to just make sure people get a chance to talk. But yeah, I think you're onto something there. The groups work really well. There's no doubt about it.
It's great. I've known people who have met some of their best friends through grief support groups, because again, these are folks who are in a shared experience in some ways. They get one another and they're talking about things on the deepest and most vulnerable of levels, and real bonds can form there.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So I guess the I guess negative ways of coping would be just to not cope at all, try to stuff those feelings or try to numb them. Alcohol and drugs.
A lot of people try and do that. I think it ends up being like a time bomb situation. You know, down the road they either get ill or the addiction takes root. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't know what else to do with it, so they tend to self-medicate that way, and we all know what that leads to. So yeah.
I mean, self-medicate, like prescribed medicate. Some people can kind of overdo it on that to try to numb out feelings. And I'll tell you, I've known a lot of people who talk about how, when their loved one passed, they immediately went into busyness mode with funeral preparation and got to do these arrangements and got to do all this paperwork and just having to do all of that stuff that really left the feelings behind for a great deal of time. And then suddenly when the work is done and they have to stop and pause and take a breath, then it's like, oh, now here it comes.
Yeah. That's that delayed grief reaction that you'll hear about. That's exactly what that is, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of curious too. Sometimes you hear of the person who's passing on, they have their wishes to not to have a funeral, a celebration of life or anything like that. I'm kind of curious to hear your perspectives on that, because I feel that it's so important for the family and friends who are grieving to kind of go through that, right? To come together and to celebrate that life. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Do you honor the wishes, or do you try to find some middle ground there?
I think people would find middle ground anyway. I would imagine, right? Like, I'm just like in your own micro families, family of origins, you would probably still cluster and share stories or pictures or laugh or cry or I think that would just naturally happen. I just don't know if it would happen in a large group organized manner. Yeah.
Often people will want nothing done out of love for their family. They're trying to protect them. And whereas if they talked with their family, they'd find that they probably wouldn't mind doing something, and they probably will. Other times they don't, and they wish they had. So it would be so nice if people could talk more openly about the process that's unfolding, but it's so hard to do. I mean, everybody's hoping that the person will survive. But when families have this open awareness, it's called, years ago, there was research on closed awareness, came out closed awareness, mutual pretense, and open awareness. If they have that open awareness, they can discuss that, and the person will realize that it's okay for their loved ones to have the ceremony, and they'll go with it. But so often it's closed and there isn't that opportunity to talk. So
this is another COVID situation going on with the funerals, right? Because you're not allowed to have a service, or up here for the longest time you could have 7 people maximum. So and then people were doing it on Zoom, or different things, right? So taking that ritual away, I think, was just yeah, awful, I think.
It's hard. You know what's going to happen when COVID lightens up and we're all sort of normal again? There's going to be a whack of funerals. There's going to be a lot of memorial services. People are going to play catch up to honor these people, and there's going to be a lot of them because they've got it on hold right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I can see that. Wow. Well, gosh.
That's a nice light topic, isn't it?
This is a light
Ironically
topic.
enough, just the other night I was watching a movie that involved grief. I don't know if anyone's seen it on Netflix, but Captain Fantastic. And I'm not super attached to it. I didn't finish it, but the premise is it's a fellow and his children who live kind of off grid in the woods, and the mom has mental health, and she had been had gone to an institute in the States, an asylum, a psychiatric unit. I'm not sure what you guys call them. She had been there for 3.5 months, but she passed away. And so the wife's parents weren't going to respect the wife's wishes on how she wanted her service to go. And so the husband and the kids jump on a bus and they go to like save mom from the funeral and try to steal the casket and do all these kooky things. But yeah, interestingly enough, it's a hot movie on Netflix right now. Lots of people are watching it.
You know, we talked about it being a heavy topic, and it is, but it's really about life, because when we grieve, we're celebrating a life that has moved on or a loss of some sort, and we're expressing our love. So it's very positive that way. We're trying to figure out ways to do it so we stay healthy. So that's important. And perhaps even more, and we can even insert a little bit of Black humor, and people who are dying sometimes will laugh about various things. And this humor works really well at all times, especially around grief. And some grieving people have the blackest humor, and we have such great laughs. So it's really a lot more positive than we think it is. It's only when we push it away that it gets negative for us.
That's it.
There you go.
I recently watched a funeral service of Monty Python, right? John Cleese was giving a eulogy for the member of Monty Python who had passed away. His name escapes me right now, but he died in like the late 80s, I believe. And John Cleese went up there and just roasted him. just gave the most scathing, hilarious, talking about what a jerk he was and what a, dingbat he was. Well, all these different things. And he was saying, and I do this today completely out of love because I know this is exactly what he would have wanted me to do. And it's worth a watch if you. So it's as far as using the humor, people go for many different ways.
Yeah, for sure.
It always seems kind of disjointed to me when you know somebody to be witty or lighthearted or light in so many ways, and then a funeral is such a heavy, dark affair. It's like, gosh, this doesn't really match with the person. Celebrations of life can do much more justice to that. But I've even seen celebrations of life sometimes that kind of deny the sadness of the loss. So it's a dicey area. I'm glad we're talking about it because I think it is something we need to put some thought into. And for goodness sake, just on a side note here, everyone get a will. Everyone draw up a will or a trust or something like that, because again, as therapists, I've heard so many of the stories of people who have passed away, didn't leave a will, and the family just destroys one another trying to figure out what to do next or get dibs on their stuff or whatever it might be. And wow, that can be so brutal.
It's really hard to make a will because it means you're going to die. You're actually putting down on paper. And so some people push away. It's all part of them. I'm not going there. And that's what causes the trouble, I think. So great advice there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really, I totally agree, Dennis. And as Irvin Yalom said in his book, Staring into the Sun, there's two things, as an old proverb is, there are two things you can't do you can't look directly at. One is the sun and the other is your own death.
Right.
But honestly, if you are wanting to truly love the people who you leave behind, it is such a gift to give to them.
Right.
Mhm.
Wow. Heavy stuff.
Whoa.
Mhm.
Or is it?
Or is it? Yeah, maybe it's not. I gotta say, I'm grieving the end of this episode today. It's sad to me to have to say goodbye.
Does this also somewhat line up in a weird way because it's Easter weekend? So there's like death and rebirth. I just want to throw that out there as a potential theme.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's a good
might
point.
have been on the back of my mind. Tomorrow's Good Friday here, and
is.
then we have this celebration coming up on the weekend. So might be a bit of that going on, Brooke.
Oh, look at that. Maybe.
So insightful. All right. Well, this has been a meaningful talk, and we will bid farewell for now. We will resurrect this podcast again next week. All right.
Excellent.
So happy Easter, everybody.
Oh, you were waiting to say that.
Oh, I so was. I wait all year. All year. You're going to hear it so many times over the next 4 days.
Oh boy.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
Dennis, it's the best. Thank you so much for a great topic and for all of your wisdom. Much appreciated. So I'll sign us off. Like and subscribe on Apple, Google, Podbean, Audible, Spotify, or YouTube. Send your questions to info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Tell a friend or two, or an Easter bunny or two. And good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Bye.
Hi, everybody.